The room went quiet the moment my father laughed. Not the warm kind of laugh. This one was sharp, cutting, the kind that makes your stomach sink before you even know why. We were surrounded by relatives, distant cousins, people who barely knew me but knew him well enough to follow his lead. He looked straight at me, shook his head, and said loudly, "This one, uneducated, worthless. I don't even know what he'll do with his life." A few people chuckled nervously. Others looked away. No one defended me. I stood there, holding a glass I hadn't taken a sip from, feeling my face burn. My ears rang, my chest tightened, and for a second I genuinely wondered if I should just walk out. But my legs didn't move. They never did in moments like this. I had learned, over the years, how to stand still while being torn apart. What no one in that room could see was the storm behind my calm face. Because while my father was mocking me like I was nothing, a single thought kept repeating in my head, steady and dangerous at the same time. If only he knew who I really was. I lowered my eyes, just like he expected. That was the role I had always played, the disappointment, the example of what not to become. To him, I was the son who didn't fit his definition of success. No fancy degree he could brag about, no job title that impressed his friends, no visible proof that I was worth respecting. "Look at him," he continued, enjoying the moment. "Always quiet, no confidence. Some people are just born useless." That word hit harder than the rest. Useless. I felt it settle into the room, heavy and final. I could almost hear people forming opinions about me in real time. The labels stuck easily when they came from a father, especially this father. I nodded slightly, not because I agreed, but because I had learned that silence kept the peace. Arguing only made him louder. Explaining only gave him more material to use against me later. So I stayed quiet, just like I had for years. But something was different this time. As I stared at the floor, memories flashed through my mind. Long nights, closed doors, sacrifices no one knew about. The struggles I never mentioned. The wins I never celebrated. The identity I had kept hidden not out of fear, but out of choice. My father mistook my silence for weakness. He always had. He turned away from me, already moving on, satisfied that he had once again reminded everyone and me of my place. Conversations slowly resumed, though the energy in the room had changed. People avoided my eyes. Some looked at me with pity, others with quiet judgment. I finally took a sip from my glass. My hand wasn't shaking. Inside, I felt strangely calm. Because for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how much his words hurt. I was thinking about how close he was to finding out the truth. How every insult was pushing us closer to a moment he would never be ready for. I looked up at his back and thought, "You have no idea. And when you do, everything will change." Growing up, I learned very early that love in our house was conditional. It wasn't given freely. It was earned, measured, and displayed like a trophy. My father believed respect came only from visible success, grades that could be shown to relatives, achievements he could announce proudly, titles that made other men nod in approval. Anything else he considered failure. I was never good at fitting into that narrow definition. As a child, I watched him praise other people's sons with an enthusiasm he never reserved for me. "Their boy got top marks," he would say. "That one is already working at a big company." Then his eyes would turn toward me, cold and assessing, as if he were searching for something worth mentioning and coming up empty every time. Whenever I tried, it was never enough. If I scored well, he asked why I wasn't first. If I struggled, he used it as proof that I was exactly what he claimed, incapable. His words didn't come with anger at first. They came casually, almost lazily, as if labeling me a disappointment was just stating a fact. "Not everyone is meant to succeed," he once told me at the dinner table. "Some people are just average or worse." My mother would lower her eyes. Silence filled the room. And I learned another lesson. No one was coming to save me. School became a place where I carried his voice with me. Teachers spoke, classmates laughed, but his judgment echoed louder than all of it. I stopped raising my hand. I stopped believing my thoughts mattered. Each time I failed publicly, I imagined him nodding somewhere, proven right again. By the time I reached my teenage years, the labels had stuck. Unmotivated, slow, uneducated. They followed me like a shadow. Relatives repeated them as jokes. Family friends treated me like a cautionary tale. And my father, he never corrected them. Why would he? He had written that story himself. There were moments I almost believed him completely. Nights when I lay awake wondering if maybe this was all I would ever be. Maybe I really was the weak link. Maybe some people were born to be looked down on. But even then, something inside me refused to die. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't ambition. It was quieter than that. a stubborn awareness that there was more to me than what he could see. I didn't know what it would become yet, only that I didn't want my entire life to be a reaction to his disappointment. Still, I kept trying to win his approval. Every small effort was an unspoken question. Is this enough now? And every time his response was the same, dismissive, impatient, cruelly consistent. You don't have what it takes, he told me once after comparing me to a cousin who had just graduated. Accept it and stop embarrassing yourself. That sentence did something to me, not all at once, but slowly, like a crack forming beneath the surface. I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself. Outwardly, I became exactly what he expected, quiet, withdrawn, forgettable. But inwardly, a decision was forming piece by piece. If he was never going to see my worth, then I would stop trying to show it to him. And that decision, though no one noticed it at the time, was the beginning of everything. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or tears. It came quietly, on an ordinary day, in an ordinary moment that no one else would remember. My father had just finished another lecture, this one shorter than usual, almost bored. He told me I was wasting time, wasting space, wasting his patience. Then he walked away like the conversation meant nothing. That was when it hit me. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt the way I used to be. I just felt empty. And in that emptiness, something shifted. I understood with a strange clarity that nothing I did openly would ever be enough for him. No explanation, no effort, no visible struggle would change the role he had assigned me, so I stopped performing. I didn't announce any grand decision. I didn't confront him or demand respect. I simply withdrew, not in a dramatic way, just enough that no one noticed. I nodded when spoken to. I answered questions briefly. I let people think I had accepted my place. What they didn't see was what happened after the doors closed. I began to work in silence. Not because I was confident, but because I was tired of being misunderstood. I started learning on my own, late at night, early in the morning, in moments borrowed from sleep and rest. I failed privately. I restarted quietly. Every mistake became something I fixed instead of something I explained. There was no applause, no encouragement, no one telling me I was doing well. And strangely, that helped. For the first time, my progress wasn't tied to anyone's approval. I wasn't trying to impress my father or prove relatives wrong. I was building something just for myself, piece by piece, without giving it a name. My father noticed the change, but he misread it completely. He thought I had given up. At least now he knows his limits, I overheard him say once. Silence suits him better. I almost smiled. Outwardly, my life looked unimpressive. Same clothes, same routine, same quiet presence at family gatherings. People stopped asking about my future because they assumed there was nothing worth asking about. And honestly, that was a relief. Expectations disappeared. Pressure lifted. Inside, though, something else was growing: discipline. I learned how to keep going without validation, how to sit with doubt and work anyway, how to lose and not quit, how to succeed and not announce it. Every small win stayed locked inside me, becoming fuel instead of noise. There were nights I wanted to tell someone, nights I imagined what it would feel like to say, "You were wrong about me," but I didn't. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready. I wanted the truth to be undeniable when it finally came out. I wanted facts, not arguments, reality, not emotion. My father continued living in certainty, certainty that he knew me, certainty that I was exactly what he had always said, and that certainty made him careless. He stopped watching closely. He stopped paying attention. That was his biggest mistake. Because while he was convinced I had accepted being nothing, I was becoming someone he would never be able to ignore. Not loudly, not publicly, but completely. Time passed in a way that felt invisible to everyone else but heavy to me. Days blurred together, marked not by events but by effort. I lived a double life, one that looked exactly like the failure my father had always described, and another that existed entirely out of sight. To the outside world, nothing had changed. To me, everything had. I kept my head down and my plans to myself. When relatives asked what I was doing these days, I gave vague answers. When my father made comments about my future, or lack of it, I didn't respond. My silence fed his confidence. He believed he had broken me, that I had finally accepted the version of myself he'd been selling for years. What he didn't know was how much strength that silence required. There were setbacks, moments when progress stalled and doubt crept in. Times when I questioned whether all this quiet effort would lead anywhere at all. But even then, I refused to go back to seeking validation from people who had never believed in me. Every time I felt myself slipping, I remembered his laugh, his certainty, And I kept going. Slowly, the pieces started coming together. Small wins turned into real results. Skills sharpened. Opportunities appeared, not handed to me, but earned through persistence no one saw. I learned how to navigate rooms where my name meant nothing, how to be underestimated and use it as cover, how to listen more than I spoke and let results do the talking. My father remained unaware. He continued telling people I was lost, confused, behind in life, and people believed him. Why wouldn't they? He sounded so sure, so authoritative. He always had. At family gatherings, I became background noise. Conversations flowed around me, never toward me. And strangely, that suited me just fine. The less attention I drew, the easier it was to protect what I was building. Success, I learned, doesn't need an audience while it's still forming. There were moments when I saw flashes of irony, my father complaining about kids these days while unknowingly describing me in reverse. Hardworking, focused, independent. He just couldn't imagine those traits existing in me. His image of who I was had frozen years ago, and he never bothered to update it. Meanwhile, my life was changing in ways that mattered. Not loudly, not dramatically, but fundamentally. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't trying to rewrite his opinion. I was rewriting my own story, and with each quiet step forward, something else shifted. My fear of him faded. His words lost their power. His insults stopped echoing. I no longer rehearsed arguments in my head or imagined conversations that would never happen. I didn't need him to see me anymore. I needed him to stay exactly as he was, confident, dismissive, unprepared. Because I knew deep down that this could not stay hidden forever. The truth has a way of surfacing, whether you announce it or not. And when it did, it wouldn't come from anger or desperation. It would come naturally at the worst possible moment for him and the most controlled moment for me. I wasn't waiting for revenge. I was waiting for timing. And that timing was getting closer. By the time I reached what most people would call success, I no longer felt the urge to prove anything. That surprised me. I had imagined this moment for years, the satisfaction, the quiet pride, the internal celebration. And yes, there was pride, but it wasn't loud. It was steady, calm, almost private. I had built something real, something stable, something that didn't disappear just because someone doubted it. The kind of progress that doesn't need applause to exist. And yet, to my father and everyone around him, I was still the same person, uneducated, directionless, behind in life. I let them believe it. There were opportunities to speak up, moments where a single sentence could have changed how people saw me. But each time I chose silence. Not because I was afraid of being exposed, but because I understood something I hadn't before. Revealing the truth too early would cheapen it. I didn't want arguments. I didn't want disbelief. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. My father continued as usual. His comments grew less angry and more dismissive, like I was no longer worth the effort. "Some people just never grow up," he told someone once, glancing at me briefly before looking away. I felt nothing. No sting. No urge to respond. That's when I knew I had changed. I no longer needed his approval to feel whole. I didn't need him to admit he was wrong. His opinion had stopped being the measure of my worth. In a strange way, that freedom felt better than any reaction I imagined he might have someday. Still, the secret weighed on me, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. I had built my life quietly, intentionally, and now I had to protect it. I became careful about what I shared, who I trusted, where I went. Not out of paranoia, but out of respect for the work it had taken to get here. Sometimes, late at night, I replayed that moment from the gathering, the laugh, the word worthless, the way the room had gone silent. I wondered how he would react if he knew the truth right then. Would he deny it? Would he get angry? Would he feel embarrassed? But I wasn't interested in guessing anymore, because deep down I sensed something approaching, a moment I wouldn't be able to avoid. Family has a way of colliding with reality eventually. Lies, especially comfortable ones, don't survive forever. And my father had built his entire image of me on an assumption that was no longer true. I didn't rush it. I didn't set the stage. I let life move forward naturally. And then, without warning, the moment arrived. Another gathering. Another room filled with familiar faces. Another opportunity for him to remind everyone who he thought I was. Only this time, as I walked in, I felt something different. Not tension, not fear, but certainty. I knew this wouldn't end the way it always had. I took my seat, calm and observant, listening as conversations unfolded. My father was in his element again, confident, loud, comfortable in his authority. He spoke freely, unaware that he was standing at the edge of something irreversible. I didn't interrupt. I didn't provoke him. I just waited. Because I knew one thing for sure now: when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't be emotional. It wouldn't be messy. It would be undeniable. It started the same way it always did. Casual conversation, laughter, small talk drifting across the room. I sat quietly, listening more than speaking, watching patterns I had seen my entire life repeat themselves. My father was comfortable, relaxed, fully convinced of his place in the room, and of mine. Then he noticed me. He didn't hesitate. He never did. With a half smile and a voice loud enough to carry, he said something about how some people never move forward in life, how time passes but they stay exactly the same. A few heads turned. Someone laughed softly. I felt the familiar shift in the room, that subtle ray centering around his words. Usually this was where it ended. Usually I absorbed it and stayed silent. But this time something inside me stayed perfectly still. He kept going, talking about education, about effort, about how he had tried everything, but some people just refused to become anything more than what they were. His words weren't angry, they were worse. They were confident. Final. As if my story had already been written and sealed. I looked at him and realized he truly believed it. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just another insult. This was the last one. Not because it hurt more than the others, but because it revealed something clearly. He was never going to stop. As long as I stayed silent, his version of me would remain the truth in that room. I felt the eyes on me again, waiting for the usual reaction: lowered gaze, quiet acceptance. Instead, I met his eyes. The room didn't notice the shift right away, but he did. He paused slightly, confused by the change in my posture, my expression. I wasn't angry, I wasn't defensive, I was calm. And that unsettled him more than any argument ever could have. "Isn't that right?" he said, expecting agreement or embarrassment. I didn't answer immediately. I took a breath, not a deep one, just enough to steady myself. I could feel my heartbeat, slow and controlled. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about proving him wrong. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about clarity. This wasn't about humiliating him. This was about ending a lie. I spoke quietly at first, forcing the room to lean in instead of me raising my voice. "You've been saying the same things about me for years," I said, "and I let you." The room went silent. My father's expression shifted, surprise first, then irritation. He wasn't used to being interrupted, especially not by me. "What are you talking about?" he asked dismissively. I didn't back down, I didn't rush. "You talk about who I am," I continued, "without ever knowing what I've been doing." Someone shifted in their seat. A few people exchanged looks. The energy in the room changed, tightening, focusing. My father laughed once, short and sharp, as if to brush it off. "Doing what?" he asked. "Hiding." That laugh could have broken me once. Now it did the opposite. I realized then that this conversation could only go one of two ways. Either I stayed silent and let his version of me survive forever, or I spoke and let the truth do what it was meant to do. I looked around the room at the same people who had watched me be reduced to nothing over and over again. Then I looked back at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was already listening in a way it never had before. Even my father, for all his confidence, had gone still. He was waiting for me to either stumble or retreat, both outcomes he was used to. Instead, I spoke carefully. "You've always told people who you think I am," I said. "Tonight, I think it's fair I tell you who I actually am." A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone stopped mid-sip. The silence thickened, heavy and expectant. My father smirked, the kind of expression meant to dismiss what was coming next. He assumed this was bluff, frustration finally spilling over. I didn't look at him right away. I reached into my pocket, not dramatically, just naturally, and placed my phone on the table between us. Then I looked up. "For years, I didn't say anything," I continued. "Not because you were right, but because I didn't need you to be wrong." That wiped the smirk off his face. I told him what I had built. Where I worked, what I had achieved. Not in exaggerations, not in emotional language, just facts, dates, numbers, names, things that couldn't be argued with. I showed proof only when it was necessary, sliding the phone forward when disbelief crossed his face. At first, he laughed, a weak, uncertain laugh. "That's not possible," he said. "You're exaggerating." So I let the evidence speak. One by one, the room absorbed the truth. The glances changed. Pity disappeared. Curiosity replaced it, followed by something closer to shock. People who had never bothered to ask me a question before were suddenly paying attention. My father's face drained of color. He looked around the room as if searching for support, for someone to back him up the way he always had. But no one did. They were too busy recalculating everything they thought they knew about me. You never said anything," he finally muttered. I didn't need to, I replied. We're too busy explaining who I was to listen. That was the moment it hit him. Not just that he was wrong, but that he had been loudly, confidently wrong in front of everyone, for years. The authority he carried in that room cracked just enough for everyone to see it. He tried to recover, to shift the conversation, to make a joke, but it fell flat. The room wasn't with him anymore. They were watching me now, not with surprise alone, but with respect he had never allowed me to have. I didn't gloat. I didn't linger on details. I said only what needed to be said. I never wanted to embarrass you, I told him, but I wasn't going to keep being embarrassed for you either. Silence followed, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. I stood up slowly, not in anger, not in triumph, just with finality. My father didn't stop me. He couldn't. The man who had always spoken over me had nothing left to say. As I walked away from the table, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because he finally knew the truth, but because I had finally spoken it. I didn't wait around to see how the silence would break. Some moments don't need an ending inside the room where they begin. I walked out calmly, the same way I had walked in, except this time my shoulders felt lighter. Whatever people were saying behind me didn't matter anymore. For the first time, my story wasn't being told by someone else. Outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Honest. I stood there for a moment, letting everything settle. Not the confrontation, not the reactions, but the years it had taken to reach this point. I realized then that I wasn't angry at my father. I wasn't even disappointed in the way I thought I would be. I was done. What hurt the most had never been the insults. It was the absence of belief. The way he had decided who I was before giving me a chance to become anything else. The way his certainty had shaped how others treated me and how I once treated myself. That was the real damage, and no revelation, no matter how dramatic, could undo it completely. But it didn't have to. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need him to suddenly understand me. I needed distance from his voice, his expectations, his version of my worth. And in that moment, I finally had it. Life moved on after that night, but not in the way people might expect. My success didn't change. My work didn't suddenly feel more valuable. What changed was how I carried myself. I no longer felt the urge to shrink in familiar rooms. I no longer rehearsed explanations in my head. I had nothing left to prove. My father and I spoke less after that. When we did, it was different, careful, restrained, stripped of authority. He never brought up that night. He didn't need to. The power dynamic had already shifted, quietly and permanently. And me. I stopped measuring my progress by who noticed it. I focused on who I was becoming, not who I was compared to. I learned that silence can be strength, but only if it's a choice, not a cage. If there's one thing I understand now, it's this: being underestimated doesn't make you weak. It gives you room. Room to grow, to learn, to build without interference. And when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't need to shout. It just needs to exist. I was never uneducated. I was never worthless. I was simply becoming. Out of sight, out of reach, and far beyond the limits someone else placed on me.